Hey guys, it's Ed from Lucid Pixel and welcome back. Yes, today's art talk is in person for two reasons. Number one, a little bit of nostalgia. My art talks used to be talking head videos like this one. I changed that a couple of years ago. But secondly, because I want this talk to hit home. I want to be a little bit more direct in today's art talk. I thought maybe talking face to face might help to drive certain things home. And the reason being is today's art talk is maybe a little bit of tough love, giving you some blunt, straightforward advice from the perspective of somebody who has lived through quite a few professional successes, but also more importantly, mistakes. But also somebody who's taught and directed for many years in my mentorship, working in different studios. And I've come across different types of students and different types of professionals, have gone through thousands of portfolios that start to show trends at a certain point. Certain portfolios and certain types of artists and certain types of attitudes that can lead to very quick professional growth, and other ones where I can see artistic careers being held back for years, if not decades. Some people hold back their entire career sometimes. So I want to have this direct conversation with you and go through a little bit of a checklist, not exhaustive, that can help you reflect on your own approach if you find that you're struggling a little bit with your own professional success. And this, maybe one of these might be able to tack onto your approach. You might be able to relate to some of these, and hopefully today's art talk can help you to overcome some of these things. That said, I have a little checklist here. And before I actually get started with this, the first thing I want to mention is what you will not be experiencing from me today is any, Aspen style rubbing my temples, or somebody like elitist rubbing his temples going, I'm so tired of seeing this. How many times do I have to explain this to you type of elitist bullshit talk. I'm not above you by any stretch of the imagination. I don't have life figured out, and I don't get annoyed with incompetent people, even if they throw the same question at me 600 times in a row. We are people. We're all in this boat together. And if anybody talks to you like that, they're just assholes. Whether their advice is worthwhile or not, they're probably just jerks. So just take that into account. But that said, and I've got a little checklist here because there's quite a few things I wanted to talk about. The first thing that I think is more of kind of an entry level when you're first starting off your career, and I'd say the majority of my students are usually in their early to mid 20s, starting off getting that professional training, is an unprofessional portfolio. Not being able to distinguish between a professional portfolio and a student portfolio, which is something you might have heard in other art talks in the past. And a really good analogy for this is to imagine yourself hiring a professional. For instance, in about 3 hours, I have an electrician coming by to change a couple of thermostats in my house. Do you hire a professional electrician, for instance, because he possesses the tools to do the job, because he has all the fancy electrician tools, or because they know how to use those tools, right? I have a bunch of electrician tools in my toolbox too, but I'll be damned if I know how to use half of them to their full capacity. I just know how to change a couple of, switches and plugs and stuff like that. I don't know how to rewire wiring in my house. That's a totally different ballgame. So I'm hiring them for the skill, not just for the tools. When you're in school and you're learning all of these different fundamentals, perspective and anatomy and line, how to draw line quality and values and colors and composition and visual storytelling, those are the building blocks. Those are the tools to produce a professional piece of artwork. They are not the be all end all. They are not the finished product in and of themselves. They're just tools you're going to use to get that job done. And you need to have an understanding and a mastery of these different tools to greater or lesser degree, depending on your particular career, in order to produce the professional portfolio you need to get the job. And that's what directors are looking for. That's what professionals are looking for. So when you present a portfolio, and I've seen thousands of these, if you present a portfolio that includes life drawing, perspective studies, value studies, shading studies, where you have the ball or a cube and you're doing all these different studies and stuff like that, anything along those lines, color studies, etc. Anything that falls into the schoolwork category should not be in your portfolio, because that's an indication that you're a student, you're not a professional. Okay. And that's very, very important because there's a fine line between these two. Yes, you use those tools to do the job, but no, you don't want to present those tools in their exclusivity in order to get the job. Because if you do that, that's a red flag to an employer that that artist doesn't have a professional portfolio yet. So you want finished illustrations, finished concepts, finished designs, finished paintings and works of fine art. You want to put all this together and you want to brand all of this into the package that is you, the artist, and you want to have a substantial enough portfolio, usually anywhere from 8 to 12 is a safe number. And 12 to 15 is usually kind of a max as far as that goes. And you present that to your employer. Okay. Just remember to distinguish the difference between the two. Now, while we're still on the subject of portfolio, the other thing that's important is consistency of portfolio. And I've used this example in the past. One of my old friends, Mr. Wiazowski, who's a former friend of mine from an old riding camp, a horse riding camp that I used to go to when I was a kid, Captain Wiazowski's riding school. His son, Pochuk, ended up working at Ubisoft, and I didn't even know this. And I applied to Ubisoft for a job. And so I applied to him and I said, hey, it's nice to see you and everything like that. It's nice to talk to you again. And I said, let me know. Here's my portfolio. And he said, yeah, absolutely. And about a week later, he contacted me and he said, sorry, you didn't get the job. And I went, okay, cool. And I said, but since we are friends, could you do me a favor? Because I'm always too afraid to ask this. I said, why not? Can you tell me what's wrong with my portfolio so I can fix it for next time? And he goes, yeah, of course, no problem. He said, from a technical perspective, from a skill level perspective, you are twice as advanced as the artist. And he even did me the courtesy of showing me some examples of their work, albeit a very good artist. But yeah, I was a little bit more advanced. But as soon as I saw that artist's work, I said, it makes perfect sense why they got hired. Style. I had more skill, but the other artist had better. He had the style that fit what Ubisoft was looking for, more of the Assassin's Creed type of stuff. I'm a lot more of a traditional dark fantasy type of artist. So it made absolute sense why they would hire them. You have to put yourself in the perspective of a director. And myself, I realized this very quickly when I worked as a director. You're taking a chance. You're taking a risk hiring an artist. You want to hire an artist that can help build your idea, build your brand, build your project. And if that, regardless of the skill, if that artist doesn't possess the style, you know that it would take them years at best to be able to adopt the style, whereas somebody who already has the style just needs to team up with a senior artist and they'll be up to speed quickly, but they don't have to reinvent themselves artistically. Okay. And this is something I've already touched on in former Art Talks, but I think it's worth reiterating because it's an important factor that a lot of people take for granted. And that fits into what I would say is kind of like your brand, so to speak. Now, brand is not something that comes overnight. My brand did not manifest itself until working professionally for years because I had to experiment. I had to try different things out. I came from an animation background and I got into fantasy illustration, but at the beginning of it, I was kind of flip-flopping between a more cartoony style and a more realistic style. And do I want to do more visual storytelling or do I want to focus more on design? There was a lot of flip-flopping. And through that flip-flopping, which is necessary, it's a part of the growth process, I wasn't necessarily buckling myself down on a certain style, a certain brand, a certain product to whatever studio or client I was trying to present myself to. And that, from a professional's perspective, can be a little bit scary because they might have a couple of examples of work that looks nice, that they like, but maybe there's only a few of those. And there's a lot of them that they don't necessarily care for. And they might make them think, well, what does this artist want to do? Where do they place themselves? And what do they enjoy the most? And when did they actually produce that piece of artwork? Can they recreate this years after the fact? Did they paint these last 3 pieces in the last month? Or are these 5-year-old pieces? That's significant because I've been hired by studios to draw something, to recreate something from my portfolio, but I have no idea how I did it. It was just kind of this experimental mishmash, and I ended up with this finished product, and I had no idea how I got to those results. So recreating those results in my today was hugely stressful because it basically felt like I was trying to copy or plagiarize somebody else's style of artwork. That was very, very challenging for me and very stressful. And the results were hit and miss, depended on the situation. Sometimes clients were happy because I lucked out and sometimes not, but it was a real gamble. So something you definitely want to avoid. So Next. And this is a big one. I'm going to package this in a word, in a term. I'm going to package this with the word ego. And I don't mean ego in the vanity side of the word. I mean ego in the connecting your feelings to what it is that you do sense of the word. Because our egos are very, very fragile things, particularly when you're artists. We very often associate ourselves, our personalities, in those things that we express. If you do cute, sweet, innocent work, that might mean because it's a reflection of yourself, of your soul. And if you're somebody who does dark, gritty stuff, maybe that's a sign that that's a reflection of your artistic tastes and your personality as well. In that, you become very emotionally protective of what it is that you produce, particularly when you've invested a lot of time. Time reinforces ego very often. It's like when you've been in a relationship for a really long time and you break up. Very often the most hurtful thought to a lot of people is, I've invested so much time into this relationship for nothing. It's that feeling like you've wasted years that very often hurts the most, right? It's the lost investment, so to speak. Not to sound callous or anything like that. But that applies to our art. So if somebody, a well-meaning person, a professional who understands what you're looking for and is looking at your artwork in a very unbiased and very professional and very clinical way, comes to you and offers you some kind of feedback, me as a teacher and as a director have often faced certain students or certain artists on my team that were resistant or made excuses for those shortcomings of their work. And by shortcomings, I don't mean they suck per se. I just mean there's certain fundamental things that are missing. Maybe the style isn't there. Maybe there's certain fundamentals that are a bit weak in their work. Maybe they didn't package it well, whatever the case might be. It could be a whole bunch of different factors. It's really a case-by-case situation where I look at their work and I give them some constructive feedback and they go, oh yeah, but I'm doing it because of this, and that. And I go, okay. And I said, yeah, but you could also work on this because, it's because of that, it's all because of this. And at a certain point, depending on how many excuses and how resistant that artist becomes at a certain point, because very often that artist might be very lacking. Sometimes it's just a little something, but sometimes that artist might be very lacking and really doesn't have proper insight into their own work. Maybe they haven't had enough feedback over the years. It's the first time they're facing critique, so to speak, that I stop them at a certain point and I say, well, why don't you have work yet? Why aren't you working? If you've got it all together, if all of your work is exactly as it should be, why isn't anybody hiring you yet? And that's kind of a bit of a blunt way of saying, sit down. You're not there yet. Stop making excuses. You need to fix that. Like I said, it's a bit of tough love. I'm trying to help you. You haven't achieved a career in over 10 years because of reasons you came to me for. I'm offering you advice. Sit down and listen, right? In fact, I've referenced this in the past before. It was really funny. Anthony Jones was talking. It was a podcast or a Q&A or something like that. I think it might have even been the one that I did with him. You can check it out here. Yes, I'm plugging my own video. Where somebody had asked them a question during one of his live streams or something like that. What's the common quality of artists that tend to succeed the fastest? And he said, they listen to you when you talk. I offer advice. I'm putting it out on the table. I'm working professionally. I have for years. I'm telling you what to do. Are you actually going to apply it? Are you actually going to listen or not? Or are you just going to go, yeah, thanks, and then go and watch a YouTube video, right? You can very often see that. And for me, in my particular case, the artists that I have experienced as a teacher and as a director that really succeeded the fastest and really grew the fastest are the ones that were sitting there going, yeah, okay, well, not with their phone. They got a notepad and they're like, okay, taking notes. I even, for my students in my mentorship, I very strongly recommend, in fact, most of the time, I recommend recording our Skype calls. That way they can rewatch the videos over and over again. And they don't have to take notes because there's so much information that you have to go over it sometimes 15 times before it all starts to sink in, right? But digesting and reflecting on and applying that information is mandatory. And as Chris Oatley said years ago, I've quoted him in the past, if you subscribe to a fitness magazine and read an entire magazine every single day for a year, but you don't go to the gym, are you going to be in better shape at the end of the year? No, you have to apply it, right? So it's about listening, understanding, stop making excuses, just listen. unless there's a real specific reason for certain things. But there's a certain point where people just have excuses for everything, and those excuses are really protecting that person's ego. They're really protecting that person's fear of critique. And the more professional you get, the more professional you get, the more you learn how to be very, very unbiased and clinical about what you do, because you want to get a job. You want to be able to find growth. And that's very often a very big determining factor. And I swear I've had artists that were in their 50s and 60s that are still resisting feedback, saying they want to get a job doing this. And then I say, well, why don't you have any artwork in your portfolio after 30, 40 years of doing this that reflects that? And they go, I don't want to do it. So there you go. Now, to flip that coin, artists that think too little of their work. And that's, I'd say, the more common obstacle. That artists just have never heard the words from a professional saying, you're ready. And I find more often than not, as a professional, I look at a lot of different artists' artwork, my students at least. I can't do that as a service to everybody, but for my students, I'll look at my students' artwork and they think so little of what they do. And I'm sitting there going, you were overqualified 10 years ago. How come you haven't worked yet? Oh, I'm still working on it. You can work on yourself for the rest of your life. But there's a certain point where you just got to go, okay, just jump off the damn diving board and go in the water. Stop waiting for that perfect moment. That perfect moment's never going to come, but you are ready. So go. And just as here's an example that I'm not using not to show up this artist at all, but rather just to prove as a very good example of my point. A very successful, very celebrated artist, Martina Fakova, who was my student at one point. Yeah, I know. I don't know why either. It didn't make any sense to me either. But I told her, she said to me, are you ready? And she was wondering whether or not she should reach out to Cynthia Shepard at the time. And I said, Martina, I said, it's insulting that you would even ask me that question. I said, you are so ridiculously overqualified. I mean, look at your work, for God's sakes. If you don't, just go to adamduff.com. Or go to lucidpixel.com, scroll down. I've got a piece of Martina's work from years ago. And you're sitting there going, she wasn't sure if she was good enough? And now she's a big Magic the Gathering artist, and she's very celebrated all over the place. But she wasn't entirely sure. Well, she's from Slovakia. She might not have necessarily had that feedback. But my feedback to her was like, don't listen to me. Go, get out of here. If you're not sure, if you're sitting there on the fence getting a little bit of feedback, sometimes you have to be open to that feedback. Sometimes that feedback's going to go, you're really good, you're getting there, but you just need to blah, blah, blah. Or you're ready, go. And if somebody says you're ready, if somebody gives you the green light and goes, go. Just do it. You got to get your feet wet professionally. You got to overcome the anxiety of actually applying to a job and starting work at a new studio or starting work for a client. You've got to do that because it's very scary. When you go from being somebody who just did stuff on their own to all of a sudden doing something and there's an expectation of it, and you have to warm up that muscle. The last one is impatience. This is a big factor that plays into professional success and growth. Especially nowadays, where you're looking for that quick fix, and people look for that quick fix everywhere. And it's not surprising in the art field, because art can be a very slow burning, slow growth process, where you're working every day, you're training every day, you're practicing every day, you're looking for different resources for learning, you're going to this mentorship, you're going to that website, you're checking out this YouTube video, you're buying this book, you're going to this school. And you're slowly building things, and sometimes seeing growth can be very, very, growth can feel invisible to you. It can feel non-existent. But there's a few factors that go into artistic growth that you have to take into account. Number one of the things that I've witnessed in my own artistic growth, and in countless other artists as well, is the artistic progress curve is not this steady diagonal incline like this. No, it very often kind of feels flatline for a certain period of time. And the reason being is, in order for something to click, in order for you to have that epiphany, you have to get certain pieces of the puzzle in place. And it's not a one puzzle piece solution. Sometimes it requires multiple puzzle pieces. So You get a little bit of that, a little bit of this, and a little bit of that. And then the last, you've been struggling and kicking and busting your ass for the last 6 months, for the last year, the last 2 years. Nothing, I'm not making any progress. And then all of a sudden somebody says, well, what about that? And they give you that little key, and all of a sudden you go, and you literally gasp when that happens. I remember that happened with me at a schoolism workshop. I've mentioned it before, attending Carla Ortiz's workshop in Montreal when she did the schoolism workshop. And she said something that made me go, oh my God, that makes sense. It was just this, she handed the entire audience this key, and I let out an audible gasp in front of everybody at the school. And I was a teacher too, so people were like, ooh, she must have said something important, because the teacher just gasped when she said that. And Carla looked at me. I don't know if she remembers it. If you're watching, Carla, hello. And she looked at me and she says, I think the gentleman in the front row had an epiphany. And I said, Carla, you have no effing idea. No idea. And she literally unlocked something for me. But it had been years where I was kind of mulling and sitting on these different principles, and all of a sudden something just fell into place. So what happens is you might feel flatlined, but then all of a sudden your growth just takes off. You have these big explosive moments. I had one last year when it came to tattoo art. I learned a lot from my tattoo artist when it came to design and just perfectionism of design aesthetic and all that kind of stuff, that immediately and permanently had a huge impact on my artwork. So shout out to all my tattoo artists, including a couple that I'm teaching right now. I have a lot of love and respect for the tattoo industry. So understand that that's a process, but at the same time, understand that it takes bloody time. And one of the questions that a lot of professionals don't like hearing, myself included, it's kind of a question that might get you a little bit of attitude and responses. How long do you think it's going to be before I get a career? And my answer to that is, how hard are you willing to work? You know, are you willing to apply yourself? Are you willing to apply the lessons that you learned? Or are you just going to say thanks and move on with them and not apply anything? Are you willing to put the time and effort into it? If you're not, it's going to take you longer, or you might never achieve it if you're just looking for a quick fix. And a lot of reasons why a lot of artists tend to tap out in the end is because they went, well, shit, I didn't realize this was going to be a 10, 15 year growth path. Now, it doesn't take that long to get a career. Usually a couple of years might be enough. 5 years might be enough. But don't watch the clock. Instead, enjoy the process, grow slowly, and just immerse yourself in the passion of your craft. But find a way, either yourself or through fellow professionals, to get an unbiased, lucid perspective of your own work. All right? With that said, of course, I love you all with all my heart, and happy painting. Take care.